Thank you so much, Aditya, for this opportunity that you have given us, to share our thoughts and our notions regarding this whole concept of enabling 3D printing in healthcare. I would just start my presentation by giving a brief overview. It will be a brief overview how 3D printing is affecting healthcare in daily basis, be it universities, be it hospitals, or be it medical device companies. Now, let's begin to where it all started. So, on what knowledge is surgery based? It all started with understanding anatomy from animal dissections and human dissections. And with the advent of X-ray and CT and MRI, the imaging shifted from understanding of just the generic anatomy to the understanding of patient's anatomy. Now, what is our goal right now? Our goal is not just diagnose the images and bring the conclusion in head of the surgeon, but actually do this engineering on the images and bring a patient specific more patient specific solutions at the table. Now, as I mentioned before, the healthcare ecosystem is divided into these three interest groups. We have universities and research centers, which are working day in and day out on a lot of theses, be it biomechanics and incubation centers coming up, with the research center coming up and all the NITs and IITs. We have medical device companies where exactly the idea comes up, right? You are going more into patient-specific solutions. We see a trend, happening in all the big MNCs, and they're moving towards patient-specific solutions. And when it comes to patient-specific solution, they think 3D. And we also have hospitals who are not only executing these patient-specific solutions, but also creating anatomical models, either as a service offering or they are opening up a lot of 3D point-of-care labs. We would be talking about hospitals first. Now, the first question typically when we approach a surgeon or a hospital, they ask is that why do we actually need a 3D printed anatomical model in our hospital? We have been doing the surgeries since donkey years and we don't see that we need it. But in reality, there are a lot of benefits of using 3D printed anatomical models in the hospital. Be it pre-operative planning, you can talk about, if you have a plan already in your head, you have lesser stress and more confidence. And we have seen this specifically in a lot of complicated anatomies or a lot of diseased patients wherein there are a lot of tumors and the anatomy is very, very tricky. Pre-operative planning does, play a very important role. This definitely leads to better outcome of patients because the surgeon has a surgical plan. There are no outlier issues when he's in the intra-op, and it gives an overall better outcome to the patients. Not just the patients, but it's also a great educating tool for the next generation of surgeons. We see in India, we have a lot of medical colleges, we have DNB students, we have JRs, SRs who are always on the learning mode, and they always operate as well. So anatomical models can also be a very good educating tool for them. Last but not the least is achieve true informed consent from patients. So many times it has happened that, we explain the surgery, the doctors explain the surgery to the patient and they just sign the form. They exactly do not know what's happening, right? Because even if you show them a scan, you show them a MRI or a CT scan, they still would not understand what exactly the problem is. But if you give them a printed model, they can actually feel it and understand where exactly the issue lies. And this achieves a true informed consent from the patient. Just to give one of the example of a pre-operative planning. Now, this is a case study wherein Dr. Shibano, he tried to put a lot of value addition in 3D printed models. What he did was he was doing a very new technology called as percutaneous pulmonary valve implantation, opposed to standard open heart surgery. Now, where 3D printed models helped him was he did a retrospective study which led to more accurate selection of patients who could undergo this new approach because there is only specific anatomy wherein you can do this PPVI surgery. Coming on to our next interesting case of a preoperative planning. Now, the residents were divided into two groups. Now, the group A was actually viewing a 3D rendered model on the computer of a pancreatic cancer, and a group B actually had a 3D printed model in the hand. So it's quite interesting because both of them use 3D printing technology, but one actually had a model and one was just viewing it virtually. Group B showed a significantly higher quality of surgical plan scores in diagnosing where the pancreatic cancer was and what was the surgical approach which the surgeon should take. This is one more interesting case study of a newborn, which was helped with the support of 3D printing. Now, this is a baby boy who was diagnosed prenatally with a DORV, which is double outlet right ventricle. From the ultrasound images, it was very challenging because it was very difficult to determine the exact 3D relationship of the different anatomical structures, and surgical plan was getting extremely difficult to be executed. What the surgeon's team did in the Presbyterian Hospital was they performed a low-dose CT and they transferred the images into the 3D software, and they obtained an optimal 3D reconstruction. And this was the 3D model which they happened to print. What happened was that with the 3D printed model in hand, they found an ideal solution for repairing all of the defects just during one surgery. Otherwise, the baby had to, undergo a typical series of a lot of palliative operations throughout his entire life for up to 10 years. This is another case of a 17-year-old girl who had an ECG because one of her brothers had a heart murmur. And this indicated an abnormality in the aorta, and she was referred to this Children's Hospital of Michigan. The investigation actually revealed an aortic aneurysm with a very distorted shape. So how 3D printing helped here was that they actually performed a practice run or the simulation in the cath lab where they placed the actual stent into the model, and they did it at least 3 to 4 times so that they know where exactly the stent has to be placed. The advantage of this simulation was that instead of doing it in a proper OR, they just put the stent in a cath lab. And with the treatment in the catheterization lab, Ariana actually spent just one night in the hospital and was home the next day. One more interesting case study of a 3D printed splint. This is a story of baby Kaiba, and he was suffering from a severe tracheobronchomalacia, which actually causes his windpipe to collapse and blocking the crucial flow to the lungs. So he was actually put on ventilators, and currently there was no treatment which could actually help the patient. Now, the Dr. Green from Mott Children's Hospital, where the baby was operated, he approached Dr. Hollister from one of the University of Michigan, who was actually working on a bioresorbable splint. What they did was they obtained an emergency FDA approval for this, and they created a 3D absorbable splint wherein the splint was actually sewn on the bronchus, and the patient was discharged after 21 days because he was off ventilators, and within 3 years the splint was reabsorbed. Coming on to the next bit of the healthcare ecosystem, which is quite interesting, is the medical device companies. Now, traditionally, there are a lot of methods for anatomy characterization. When we talk about anatomical design inputs, it is one of the very important factor in the success of an implant. Several sources can traditionally be consulted to characterize a certain anatomy. Like, for example, physicians can give qualitative input based on the experience. We have, literature study that can provide more quantitative input as well. Cadaver and animal studies can also provide a more hands-on approach. And the input of all these things can be, combined with the analysis of the shape and performance of the existing devices. Now, these approaches have their certain limitation. For example, input from physicians can be anecdotal and difficult to quantify. We have studies in literature which are always not clear in describing what exactly methodology was used in the manufacturing of the implant. Cadavers are typically used in small numbers and basically are not large enough to achieve statistical significance. And animal samples are any which ways limited, in their resemblance to the human anatomy. So what happens is that these limitations of traditional methods, leads to significant risk for a success of a device, and following other risks. So where the device does not necessarily reflect the diversity in the population, leading to smaller target market. It can also have a poor device performance or failure, and can also result into inefficient, evidence. And last but not the least, it has got a longer time to market. So this is where the typical medical device companies would really want to focus. They want to decrease their lead time in the market. And here comes the power of computational modeling. Because of all these traditional methods, that is what they started to focus more on, the computational modeling. It has enabled medical device developers to refine implant designs before testing them during clinical trials. And as you know, as the computational modeling is picking up, we have seen that now the regulatory bodies as well as the medtech companies, they are relying more on simulations on virtual patients, and reduce their dependency on animal and human testing. And the virtual patient idea offers medical device company a very cost-efficient methodology to innovate patient care and more easily achieve added value over existing products. Now we have a pie chart on the right-hand side. I picked it up from one of the medical device innovation consortium in US, where they say that now the sources of evidence are just the computer benchtop modeling, animal testing, as well as human trials. But the future is interestingly having a very big pie of virtual patients. And that's where the regulatory bodies and the medtech companies are going towards that. So what's the role of virtual patient in R&D? Virtual patients are used in various ways in the design input, verification, as well as the validation stage of a device design. Now, they enable the advanced 3D morphometric analysis, which is the number 1, and number 2, which is the statistical shape modeling, and give you a nominal or a worst case anatomy as well. The resulting shapes are also used along with initial virtual patients and are a very great input for virtual and physical testing. Once you create this implant, they can be virtually implanted into those anatomy, and you can even go ahead and create a physical model creation. So your validation and your post-market phase reduces a lot once you use a virtual patient. A classic case study to give you a very good significance of a virtual patient. Now, this is one of our customers, DJO Surgical, and they wanted to launch a very novel implant, a hip stem, and it was a less invasive implant which closely matches the anatomy of the patient. Now, once they did their pre-market evaluation, out of the 30 cases, they actually had 8 femur fractures. And 2 out of the 6 of their design surgeons actually stopped using the implants. Now they realized the importance of the virtual population. What they did, they went back and they did a lot of changes in the design, and they came to know that at some locations, the hip stem was too wide, leading to local stress concentration, which helped explain why the certain patients were having fractures. Now they made their changes according to the virtual population statistical simulation analysis, and the new design, when they went into the market again for a preclinical trial, they found 0 fractures in 60 cases. The stem has been launched successfully in the market, and there has been no misfires as of now. A second case of aortic aneurysm device testing by Medtronic. Now Medtronic wanted to treat thoracic aortic aneurysm, and they were working on the R&D since past 7 years. And they used to create benchtop testing models using glass blowing technique. So it used to take for an engineer at least 3 weeks with CAD designing to design the benchtop model, and 4 weeks for an artist to glass blow the model. Now, glass blowing is actually an art and not an exact science. So where does 3D software or virtual population help them? Now, what they did was they were not able to create only the patient-specific model, but also population-specific and worst-case benchtop models. The new workflow allowed them to create a design in 1 to 2 days, and they also allowed them to downsize the production time just to 1 to 2 weeks instead of glass blowing technique. Now let's come to the last part of the healthcare ecosystem, the universities and research centers. Now there are various applications in academia institutes. We have biomedical engineering, we have natural sciences, as well as medical schools. Now, why do they want to involve 3D printing? Definitely technology innovation is one of the most important criteria, but ranking position is also the target of academic institutes. Now, National Institute of Ranking Framework, which is NIRF, in their ranking document gives a lot of weightage to the upcoming innovations, the patents which has been filed by the institutes. And there, it's actually where the 3D printing role comes in. Now, one of the main application of our software is in computational biomechanics field. Computational biomechanics can be further subordered to mechanics of heart tissue, orthopedics, cardiovascular, and craniomaxillofacial. The second main application of the software, 3D software, can be in medical field, and which can be classified further into orthopedic, cardiovascular, and craniomaxillofacial. So overall, for academic institutes, who strategically incorporate anatomy engineering to support their long-term vision research, and who also educate students with industry and hospital standards, 3D printing has been seen to be adopted at a very high scale. Lot of manufacturers, a lot of 3D software companies have got a lot of plans, have got student licenses, have got university site licenses, just to aid the adoption of universities at a higher level. So I would just like to conclude my presentation by this statement that 3D printing is not just the future anymore. It's definitely our present, and it's impacting lives on a daily basis. We see a lot of 3D printing happening. Even layman right now can see a lot of ventilators, COVID masks coming in India as well, who are adopting a lot of 3D printing. So interestingly, a lot of people around me also are coming up with this thing, oh, that you are working in 3D printing technology. So now we know what exactly it is. So it's not the future anymore, guys. It's actually the present, and it's good enough that we have to implement it at every level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayushi, for summarizing how what are the various areas of adoption for 3D printing. So on this note, I just like to share a poll with our audience. I think I see that it's a wide cross section here today. We have clinicians, we have people from service bureaus, we have some machine manufacturers. So it's interesting. We just want to see what the audience feels. So I'm just launching a poll for all the audience. So the question is, what have you already adopted or are planning to adopt in 3D? So we'll leave this on for say 5 to 10 seconds for everyone to select their answers and put it in. So I see responses already coming in. So it's quite interesting. Ayushi, for you, what in India, what do you feel is which of these areas do you feel are ahead in adoption?
Absolutely. So globally, if you talk about it, I think virtual patients and 3D surgical planning would be also a little bit higher. But in India, it's a good trend that we are seeing patient-specific surgical, guides coming in. Personally,
Yes.
I would to see, number 1 and number 3 coming in, because we have a lot of Indian manufacturer companies, and I would want them to adopt this concept of virtual population. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. So for us, thanks again, Ayushi, for sharing your time today and being part of this session and sharing insights on various aspects of healthcare.